You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Welcome back to On the Way Home, the podcast where we explore the people, partnerships, and ideas shaping the future of housing, belonging, and community. I'm your host, Emmy Kelly. Today, I'm joined by Alyse Bernbaum, Executive Director of the Aubrey and Marla Dan Foundation. Alyse's work sits at the critical intersection of youth mental health and youth homelessness with a focus on early intervention, prevention, and wraparound supports that help young people find stability, purpose, and hope. Through thoughtful partnership and a commitment to meaningful outcomes, Alyse is supporting reshaping how we respond to some of the most complex challenges facing young people today. Let's jump in. Welcome, Alyse. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
We always begin our show with our signature question, which I'd love to hear from you on. What does home mean to you?
So home to me, it's more than just thinking about a structure. It's a feeling. It's that moment where you walk through the door and you're able to exhale. You don't have to be on guard, where you feel seen, where you feel accepted, and where you see supported. A place. Oh my God, it's me. Sorry. I thought I put that on Do Not Disturb. But it's a place where you feel like you don't have to be on guard, where you feel seen, where you feel accepted. It's a place, it's a community. And really, I think when we think about that feeling, it really reframes what we mean when we're talking about youth homelessness.
Before we dive into AMDF's work, we'd love to hear about you personally. So if you tell us about your journey, what led you to this work? Was there a moment or experience that personally shaped your commitment to supporting young people at the intersection of mental health and homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, I've now been at the foundation for almost 10 years. And when I started working here, it was sort of a happy accident. I started to help out working at the foundation. It's my family's foundation, for the summer. And when I started working here and seeing all the amazing organizations that my family was already supporting, my parents were already supporting, I think I realized that I really had a really unique opportunity to make a difference. And I think in terms of the focus of the foundation of youth mental health and youth homelessness, we all know what it's like to hit a wall. Maybe it's through anxiety, maybe it's through burnout or through grief. And in those hard moments, really what makes a difference is having support. It's having someone to call. It's having access to care, having a safe place to land while you figure things out. And now imagine being a young person where you don't have a family or a community safety net. You don't have that financial cushion. You don't have access to mental health. And you potentially don't even know how to access a system. And so that's what really, I think, shaped my commitment. And the longer I've been doing this work, the more I've come to understand how much timing really matters, because we know when support shows up early, it can redirect a life. And when it doesn't, that's when challenges like mental health challenges can turn into housing instability, disruptions in school, unemployment. And so they really aren't two separate issues, they're entwined. And we know that long-term change doesn't come from just addressing one piece at a time. It's really about creating a coordinated team around the young person. And that's really what shapes everything that we do at AMDF. We invest in prevention and early intervention. We invest in wraparound supports and really making sure that young people don't have to navigate their hardest moments alone.
That's incredible. And now I'm wondering if you'll share like a little bit about the family's journey to choosing this spot of investment. I mean, there's so many needs. Was there something specific that motivated investment in youth mental health and housing?
Yeah, so committed to our two priority areas in 2017. And, I think the reason again why youth mental health is I think everyone has been either they know somebody who's been struggling with mental health, or maybe you yourself have been struggling with mental health. So that just seemed like a natural fit for us. And then, just the fit. We live in Toronto, our funding is across Ontario. But just living in Toronto, walking the streets, it's really, you can't ignore that there's a housing crisis. It was happening then, it's still happening now. And so I think just being, seeing what's happening in the city, we felt like we wanted to do something to address that. And again, the more we've worked in both areas, the more we've seen that they really are intersected. So, yeah.
Absolutely, it is. You work at the intersection of youth mental health and youth homelessness, like you said. From your perspective, how do these two issues show up together in a young person's day-to-day life? What are they actually experiencing?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's hard for me to say exactly what they're experiencing, but I can imagine. I can imagine, what it's like to try to study for an exam where you don't know where you're going to be sleeping that night, or imagine trying to apply for a job where you don't have a stable address, or preparing for a job interview when your nervous system is in survival mode, or you don't necessarily know where your next meal will come from. And when we're talking about youth homelessness specifically, we're not talking about just housing. It's so much more than that. It shows up in strained family relationships, untreated mental health challenges, disruptions in education. And that trauma doesn't just disappear just because somebody has a roof over their head. We know in Toronto, there's more than 2,000 young people that are experiencing homelessness each night. And roughly 1 in 5 young Canadians struggle with mental health challenges. So when we think of that, I think what's really important is when we address housing, mental health, and employment, the outcomes for all of these things can shift dramatically. We can increase stability, we can increase school rate completion, employment becomes sustainable, and permanent housing becomes a reality. And that's why we at AMDF, we don't fund in silos, because a young person's life doesn't exist in silos. It's much more complicated. It's much more complicated. So when we're aligning supports, and timing and coordination, all of that comes together. That's really when trajectories can truly change.
And I really like what you said about, not making assumptions about what that could look like for people. And I think like through our work at Blue Door, we absolutely prioritize that individual focus, because no two journeys are alike, right? And we never know in that moment what might be impacting someone, what's impacted someone from, previous experiences or relationships or circumstances or anything. Um, and so maybe we'll talk a little bit more, because the foundation focuses on early intervention, prevention, wraparound care, which we know is so important. Like you said, like stop it from happening in the first place. What does that look like in practice to you in terms of your priorities, and how does the partnership come together? So maybe we can use Blue Door as an example. I know you fund other organizations, but since we're on this pod together, we could talk about what that looks like, and what difference has it actually made for young people on the ground.
Yeah, and Blue Door, you're such a leader in the space in terms of setting best practices in the space. So happy to use Floor Tour as an example. And so, I mean, if we go back to just understanding what early intervention and wraparound care means, I'll just state it simply. So early intervention is stepping in before crisis actually happens. And when we're talking about wraparound care, we're really looking for programs and solutions that aren't asking young people to solve challenges in isolation, And so I think the relationship with Blue Door and even the trajectory in which we've supported Blue Door really exemplifies that. So we began funding Blue Door in 2020, and we originally were funding the inclusion program, and that's the first safe housing program in York Region that was supporting 2S LGBTQ plus youth experiencing homelessness. And that program focused on moving young people from transitional housing into permanent housing. But it was so much more than just the housing outcome. It was the integration, right? You were closing gaps between housing, mental health support, and employment, and having that all under in one place. And so Construct has many of those same elements. It's going above and beyond just providing job training. It's offering certification in the skilled trades, structured mentorship, financial literacy, and a clear pathway to employment. So just since we've been supporting the program, we know 40 youth participate each year. And since we've started supporting it, 120 to date have moved into trades careers within 6 months. So that's incredible. So those results really speak for themselves. You're taking young people who are just surviving, and you're giving them an opportunity to contribute, and moving them from just receiving services to being able to build something tangible. So they're not going from feeling like they're unstable, they don't know what their next move is. You're really giving them an identity and a purpose. And I think that's what really is so unique about Blue Door and sets you apart, that you're focusing on the individual and what it is that they need, and you're doing it from a place of dignity. And I mean, I know when we were talking just last week, you told the incredible story about Matt and the barriers that he faced and he was able to overcome through Construct. And that was such a powerful example of what's possible when the right supports are given at the right time. So I'd really love for you to share that, if you don't mind.
Talking to myself. Sorry for the listeners, I was on mute. The stories I was saying are what we live for. Certainly it's what we live for at Blue Door. And as a partner of ours, I'm sure that is a big part of what you live for as well, and what keeps you motivated to do this work. Matt was a young man who came to Blue Door after being in the justice system, and he had been denied 7 job opportunities because of his experience with the justice system. And so he joined the Construct program, and we worked with Matt during that time. He was actually one of our first participants. And at the end, we were able to help him find employment. And he was so motivated by that he also went back to night school to pursue his education at York University. And now he's working in Toronto on some pretty big projects. We just saw him recently, and he came back to mentor some of our participants. So we've launched a mentorship program last year. And so past participants will come and share with our current participants, things they wish they knew that would have been helpful, or how to navigate when they graduate and things like that. So it's been great to have Matt back. And he was also an advocate and impact speaker for our Giving Tuesday campaign. And that's just one story. We do have, other stories of young single moms that have been challenged to navigate housing stability at this point in our history, when cost of living far surpasses what they're actually making in that moment. And so for those who are interested to get into the skilled trades, we can certainly support with those pathways. And if you find out from participating in the Construct that it wasn't the right choice for you, we support you with other employment pathways, but all with the intention of helping you secure an income of a living wage that allows for safe, dignified housing and housing stability over the long term. And it's been key because it doesn't just end with people that come to us or learn about the program. It's even those who have been accessing emergency services for, a few years that find this as a an important connector at a point in time in their life when they need it. So very appreciative of AMDF's support and so many partners who make this work possible.
Yeah, I think, Matt is just one great example of somebody who feels so, connected to the program, even beyond just having gone through construct, that they feel that they want to come back and, give back to the organization. And I think that just really speaks to the impact that the program is having on everyone that it touches. So that's great. Thank you.
And like, you do talk a lot about how important it is to AMDF to be more than just a funder. To your team, it's about being an active and engaged partner. What does meaningful partnership look like in practice? And how does it change outcomes for young people compared to traditional approaches?
Yeah, I think for us, when we think about funding, we're never just thinking about a specific program itself. It's going much deeper, and really, to go deeper, it starts with listening. So we spend time with leadership teams. We sit with frontline staff. We visit the programs, and we ask what's working, where are the pressure points coming, because we've learned that real change doesn't come from transactional funding. It comes from building trust. It comes from consistency, and committing long term, because we like to say, once we fund an organization like Blue Door, they become a part of the AMDF family. So we're not thinking in terms of months, we're really thinking in terms of years. And our whole granting framework is intentionally structured to be able to provide transparency and predictability, so organizations can think about their future and plan ahead, and have that clarity, so that it allows them to hire and retain staff for their programs, invest in infrastructure, strengthen evaluation and strategy, and focus on the impact and the amazing work that you're doing, rather than just constantly wondering and having to fundraise and where the next dollar is going to come from. And what we've learned from over 25 years of funding is and listening is that it's so important to fund what organizations actually truly need. And that philosophy is what's led to our Beyond the Grant initiative. So this is building on our long-term funding model, and it also reflects our belief that financial support is not enough. We really want organizations to be able to thrive, not just survive. So we're investing in the resources around the work, not just the work itself. So that can look like leadership coaching, communication and storytelling, evaluation, and impact. And it's about strengthening the foundation so that impact can scale sustainably. So a really great example of that is the work we did with Stepstones for Youth. So Stepstones for Youth is an organization that works with young people who are aging out of the foster care system. And this is one of the most vulnerable transition points that we see. And through our Beyond the Grant initiative, we supported them in producing a video that shared Richard's story. And Richard grew up in foster care. He was now navigating adulthood without a permanent support system. And the video really captured how housing, mentorship, and employment support completely shifted his trajectory. And this video was shown at their annual fundraiser, and it led to a record-breaking amount that was raised at that event. And even more amazingly, Richard actually works at Stepstones today. So again, just like Blue Door's Construct program, it's just a really great example of what happens when you completely give wraparound supports and really focus on providing skills and employment opportunities to people who are navigating the system. So from my perspective, we're not just writing checks, we're really committing to the organization. We're providing resources, and I'd like to say that we are building alongside our partners when we fund them and beyond.
Employment, purpose, and belonging are often described as powerful tools for healing. How have you seen programs help young individuals build, and I feel you've touched on this a bit, confidence and stability beyond just securing a job?
Yeah, and I think we've touched upon a little bit some of this, but when we're talking about employment programs, it's not just about the income. The employment piece can mean so much more. It's about building identity, confidence, a sense of accomplishment, and for young people, especially young people participating in Construct or any program similar, it's maybe the first time that they've had a consistent supportive adult or support system of any kind in their corner. But I think it's also important to think about, when you're thinking about after leaving a shelter, even with a job, it doesn't automatically mean sustainability. So when we focus on just the exit, we're also kind of missing the prevention piece, because we also want to make sure that we're preventing recurrence, right? We don't want the young person to just leave and then end up right back where they were. In organizations like Blue Door, you really understand this. And there's a lot of great other examples to choose from, but another one that I'll highlight is Youth Without Shelter. Their support doesn't end at the shelter door. They're also investing in permanent housing pathways and landlord relationships and building life skills, providing mental health support and ongoing case management. And they even provide on the move packages so that when youth are moving from living in the shelter to housing afterwards, they're provided with, furniture, bedding, all of those things that you really need to, really feel like you have a sense of dignity when you're moving into a new space that can maybe not feel like it's your own space. And I think the results really speak for themselves. Last year, only 2% of the youth that were exiting the Youth Without Shelter returned to homelessness. So I think that stat in itself is really incredible. And there's so many other examples that I can think of, but that's just one.
That is very cool, and I love the on the move name. We have those packages and we call them housing startup, but I love the cool name there.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any examples from your perspective? I mean, your organization is the one doing all the amazing work on the ground, so
There's a lot of amazing organizations doing this type of work, and I think when we took the leap to start thinking about how do we move away from just doing life-saving work to actually moving the needle to end the cycle of poverty or homelessness for individuals that are accessing our services, was when we started really um, looking at the different components. And so we structure our work based on the three pillars of housing, health, and employment. We believe those to be the social determinants of health, kind of how you touched on, right? And that complete person, kind of without all those pieces, it's hard to, it can be challenging to navigate the others. And so that's really how we've started working in our housing programs and, of course, our social enterprise. And to your point earlier, too, about youth leaving the care system. When we set up the inclusion program, that is where a number of our participants, actually, our first participants, were from. So there are different gaps, and as we continue to advocate for larger scale solutions, there is that important work to be done so that individuals in the meantime are not falling through the cracks. So on that note, I'm going to ask you, from where you sit, what from your desk is truly moving the needle right now, and where do you think young people are still falling through the cracks?
Yeah, I mean, in 2025 alone, AMDF supported more than 75,000 young people, and of that number, approximately 20,000 received mental health supports, and 30,000 were accessing basic needs like housing and food, and access to food. And so when I think about those numbers, what I think is working right now, it's a lot of what we've been talking about. It's integration. We're seeing real progress when housing, mental health, and employment are addressed together and not just in isolation, because we know that young people are falling through the cracks at the transition point. So I mentioned aging out of foster care, leaving shelters, but it can also look like being discharged from hospitals, or just simply reaching out for help when you're in crisis, or even before, and you're facing months-long wait lists. And so, it can feel like, how am I ever going to get help? And so I think as a funder, we have a real important role to play to help bridge those gaps, to be able to fund innovation, coordination, and to fund capacity and long-term solutions. So we're not just focusing on the short-term outputs, because we know if we can get the timing right and we can coordinate earlier, we can completely change the trajectory of someone's life.
And I will ask also from your desk, what is a common misconception or assumption about youth homelessness or mental health needs that you come across that needs to be challenged?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I think one assumption that we need to challenge is that it's someone else's issue, or that it's not our problem. We can tend to think of these issues as really distant, or rare, or it's happening in someone else's neighborhood or someone else's community. But it's not. It could be somebody that we know. It can be our neighbor, our classmate, our coworker, a childhood friend. I know I've mentioned how we came to this work, that we all know someone who's struggled with their mental health, even if we don't see it. And when it comes to youth homelessness, I think there's this assumption that it's only to do with housing. So again, if you provide, access, you provide a roof, the problem is solved. But we know, and I'm sure you know from speaking to people from lived experience, that it's so much more layered than that. There's trauma, there's a feeling of not feeling like you belong, building trust, and not having someone consistently in your quarter. So housing is essential, but it's not alone. It's not enough to solve the problem, and it's not a one size fits all solution. And so I think that really brings home why programs like Construct work, because they are providing that individualized wraparound support, and they're meeting people where they are, so that they can build and move forward from there, rather than trying to make it work and a one size fits all. And I think we really have to start thinking of it less as an us versus them issue, and seeing this really as a community issue, so that our solutions can become more human focused, more coordinated, and ultimately more effective.
Alyse, looking ahead, what kind of change do you hope that young people will experience? And what needs to happen for more communities to make that possible?
I think when I think of answering this question, I just imagine what it would be like, being a young person, trying to build a life. I mean, I've been that person trying to build a life. But imagine trying to navigate that, where it's confusing, or you feel like you don't have access to care. So I really hope that young people can experience systems that feel coordinated instead of confusing. That housing is also seen as foundational to well-being, and not treated as a separate issue. And I really hope that if a young person, or anyone, reaches out for help, that they can get a clear and connected and compassionate response. And so I think it's not really whether young people can thrive. I think it's really whether our systems are designed to let them. And I think that's really the place that we have the opportunity to do the work in as a funder.
That's awesome. And I was thinking about something you said, because I feel like a number of our service users, one thing we can see there is a lack of support network. And through different programs that are supported by yourself. And when the community comes together, we provide a support network so that people can achieve their dreams and goals, right? Sometimes all that's needed is a small connection at a point in time to continue to progress. So I think, to your point, you're working to create that support network in the community for our most vulnerable. And, as if we do it right, people have that opportunity to continue to advance their own plans and dreams. I think we all have them, and everybody's the hero of their own journey. And so it's really just an opportunity to be there at that point in time. And so appreciate your AMDF Foundation for all that you're doing and your support and knowledge. Clearly very knowledgeable in the space too, of youth mental health and homelessness and housing. And so really appreciate that. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners before you jump off?
I would just say it's organizations like Blue Door and all of the other incredible, we support over 50 incredible organizations that you're all doing the amazing work. And that's really what drives me to keep doing the work that we're doing. So I just thank you so much for having me and for creating a space for conversations like that. And for everyone who's listening, who cares about young people and the systems that shape their future, just thank you for listening and engaging. And if you want to learn more about us and the work that we're supporting, feel free to visit our website at amdf.ca. You could also follow us at Aubrey Marla Dan Foundation. And yeah, thank you. We're just so grateful to be a part of this community and to be a part of the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Alyse, for joining us today on the way home. Really appreciated your insights and having you on with us.
Thank you.
Take care. Today's episode featured Alyse Bernbaum, Executive Director of the Aubrey and Marla Dan Foundation, whose work highlights the powerful connection between mental health, housing stability, and purpose for young people. Her perspective reminds us that lasting change happens through early intervention, meaningful partnerships, and systems that respond to the whole person. Thank you for listening to On the Way Home, a podcast brought to you by Blue Door. Stay with us for more conversations with leaders working to create stronger, more supportive futures for individuals and communities.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.